Welcome, adventurers. Today we'll journey deep into the fiery heart of Azeroth, to the place where molten rivers flow and ancient elementals guard the realm of fire itself, Molten Core. We'll uncover how heroes first discovered this infernal domain, the legends behind Ragnaros the Firelord, and the trials that forged some of Azeroth's greatest champions. From the earliest quests that led adventurers into the depths of Blackrock Mountain, to the final blazing showdown with Ragnaros, this is the full story, the rise, the battles, and the legacy of Molten Core. If you enjoy exploring the epic tales of World of Warcraft, make sure to like, subscribe, and join the channel for more deep dives into Azeroth's greatest stories. Now, let's begin our descent into the flames. Long before adventurers ever set foot within its fiery halls, Blackrock Mountain stood as a monument to both ambition and ruin. It was not always a place of flame and ash. Once it was merely a colossal mountain at the heart of the Eastern Kingdoms, resting between the lush forests of Elwyn and the red wastelands of the Burning Steppes. But its destiny changed forever when the pride of one dwarven clan consumed them. This is where the tale of the Dark Iron Dwarves begins, a story of arrogance, forbidden magic, and the awakening of a god of fire. Centuries ago, after the fall of the once great dwarven empire of Ironforge, three clans rose from its ashes: the Bronzebeard, the Wildhammer, and the Dark Iron. These clans shared the same blood, but not the same hearts. While the Bronzebeards ruled the city of Ironforge, the Wildhammers built their stronghold high in the mountains of grim battle. The Dark Irons, led by the cunning and power-hungry Emperor Thaurissan, were left to brood in the shadows. Envious of their kin and thirsting for dominance, Thaurissan's ambitions grew darker with every passing year. Determined to reclaim what he saw as his rightful throne, Thaurissan declared war on both rival clans. What followed became known as the War of the Three Hammers, a brutal civil war that shattered dwarven unity forever. The Dark Irons unleashed their armies from the south, wielding sorcery and shadowcraft unknown to their kin. At first, their fury seemed unstoppable, but pride can blind even the greatest of leaders. The Bronzebeards and Wildhammers, though bitter rivals, united against Thaurissan's invasion. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the Dark Irons were eventually pushed back into the Red Ridge Mountains. Their empire began to crumble under the weight of defeat, yet Thaurissan refused to yield. In desperation, the Emperor turned to the arcane arts, forbidden rituals that sought to call upon powers far beyond mortal comprehension. Legends say he searched deep within the heart of the world, trying to summon a being that would grant him vengeance and restore his empire's glory. His wife, the sorceress Modgud, attacked grim battle in the north, while Thaurissan himself performed his ritual in the south, at the base of what would become Blackrock Mountain. It was a decision that would change Azeroth forever. As Thaurissan's ritual reached its climax, the ground trembled violently. The very earth split open, and from the core of the world erupted an inferno of unimaginable fury. Through flame and smoke, a colossal figure emerged, a being of molten rock and living fire. Ragnaros the Firelord, ancient elemental ruler of flame, had been torn from the elemental plane and forced into Azeroth once more. The sheer force of his return obliterated Thaurissan's city in an instant. The surrounding lands were scorched to ash, transforming the once green valleys into a wasteland of lava and stone. What Thaurissan had intended as a tool of conquest became his doom. His body was consumed by the flames he had unleashed, and the surviving Dark Iron Dwarves were enslaved by the Firelord's power. Deep beneath the mountain, Ragnaros forged his throne, a vast chamber of magma and obsidian where rivers of molten rock flowed endlessly. This was the birth of Molten Core, the heart of fire that would forever define Blackrock Mountain. From that day forward, the land itself bore the mark of Ragnaros. The air shimmered with heat, rivers boiled, and the skies above were perpetually choked with ash. Blackrock Mountain became a wound upon the world, a place where fire and shadow intertwined, where the remnants of dwarven civilization twisted into something monstrous. The Dark Iron Dwarves, bound to their fiery master, built his empire anew in the depths, forging weapons and golems in service of their elemental overlord. Above, the mountain was torn in two, its upper reaches claimed by the remnants of the Dark Irons, and in time by other forces of darkness who saw opportunity in the chaos. But deep below, hidden beyond the rivers of magma, Ragnaros brooded in his molten domain, gathering strength, waiting. His flames seeped upward through cracks in the stone, spreading corruption and heat through every corridor. The once proud dwarves who had sought to rule all of Khazmodan had instead unleashed one of the most destructive beings ever to walk Azeroth. Their greed had become a curse that would burn for millennia. Yet, from this tragedy, legends were born, whispers of a fire god sleeping beneath the earth, of elementals that guarded his realm, and of a core of molten power that pulsed at the heart of the mountain. This was the origin of Molten Core, not as a dungeon or a battlefield, but as a scar upon the world. A reminder that even the smallest spark of ambition can ignite a fire that consumes everything. And though Ragnaros lay bound to the depths, the heat of his wrath never truly faded. His servants, his creations, and his enslaved dwarves would ensure that the flames of Molten Core continued to burn, waiting for the day when mortals would once again dare to enter his realm. The return of Ragnaros shattered the balance beneath the earth. What had once been stone and silence became a living inferno, a wound that would never close. When the Firelord erupted into Azeroth, the mountain itself was reborn in flame, and those who survived his coming were forever changed. The Dark Iron Dwarves, once masters of the forge and architects of their own empire, found themselves enslaved by the very being their emperor had awakened. Their ambitions burned away, replaced by a cruel servitude under the gaze of a god made of fire. Ragnaros demanded only one thing from his new subjects: creation through suffering. He ordered them to build, to carve tunnels through the molten rock, to raise bridges of obsidian, to craft halls worthy of his fiery dominion. The dwarves, driven by both fear and awe, obeyed. Their hammers struck endlessly against the glowing stone, echoing like distant thunder through the mountain. Every spark that flew from their anvils became a symbol of their bondage, each swing a reminder that they had traded pride for chains. From these endless labors rose the foundations of a new empire, not of dwarves, but of fire. The mountain's heart became a labyrinth of molten rivers and burning caverns, where the heat alone could melt steel. The Dark Irons built bridges of blackened iron and carved vast chambers, whose walls pulsed with the glow of magma beneath their surfaces. They constructed forges that roared with living flame, powered by Ragnaros's essence itself. And deep below, at the very bottom of this blazing fortress, they forged the threshold to the Firelord's throne, the Molten Core. It was no ordinary realm. The core was a living entity, its heat alive, its flames whispering like 1,000 unseen voices. Lava flowed like blood through arteries of obsidian, carrying the Firelord's will through the mountain. Here, the boundaries between the physical world and the elemental plane blurred. Ragnaros's elemental lieutenants emerged from the magma, beings of pure fire and wrath. They became his generals, ruling over the enslaved dwarves with cruelty and discipline. Among these elementals, names of dread began to spread among the dwarves. Lucifron, the enforcer of purity, who punished any dark iron that dared defy the Firelord's will. Magmadar, the monstrous corehound, whose breath could melt an anvil and whose howl shook the caverns like an earthquake. Gar, the elemental tactician, who commanded armies of living magma. Each of these beings served as an extension of Ragnaros's burning rage, ensuring that the mountain remained a place of eternal torment and obedience. The dwarves' society twisted around this new order. Their crafts, once fueled by pride and artistry, became tools of survival. They forged weapons not for glory, but to please their masters. They built massive golems infused with elemental power, animated by runes of fire and bound to defend the halls of the core. Even the very air they breathed became toxic, filled with ash and smoke, forcing them to adapt to the choking heat. Generations passed, and the memory of freedom faded, replaced by a grim devotion to the Firelord's cause. Above the fiery depths, Blackrock Mountain itself grew into a monument of power. The Dark Irons hollowed out its core, creating a network of passages that spiraled downward into the heart of the world. Rivers of lava carved glowing paths through the stone, illuminating the dark corridors with their deadly light. In time, the mountain became both fortress and forge, a place where armies could be built and ancient forces could sleep. Yet, Ragnaros was not the only power drawn to the mountain's burning heart. The energy radiating from the Molten Core began to attract other forces: dark sorcerers, exiled warlocks, and creatures born of shadow and flame. They came seeking the mountain's power, and many never returned. But some, like the remnants of the Dark Horde, would one day carve out their own dominions within its upper halls, unaware of the inferno that burned beneath their feet. To those few mortals who dared approach the mountain from the outside, it appeared alive. The slopes bled lava from open wounds, rivers of molten rock cascading into the valleys below. The skies above were thick with black smoke, turning the sun into a dull ember. The once green lands of Redridge and Searing Gorge had become desolate, their soil poisoned by centuries of fire. Even the air carried the faint scent of sulfur and ash, a constant reminder that something ancient and terrible slept beneath. But for the Dark Irons, escape was no longer a dream. They had been remade by fire, their skin darkened by soot, their eyes glowing faintly like embers. They had become creatures of the mountain, bound to its heat and its master. Some began to worship Ragnaros not out of fear but faith, believing that his flames had purified their blood and given them a new purpose. Their priests, the Fire Callers, preached that the Firelord's rule was eternal, that he would one day rise again to claim the surface world and burn away all weakness. As the centuries passed, Molten Core became more than a prison. It became a myth. Its heat could be felt even in the outer tunnels of Blackrock depths, where lesser creatures whispered of its glow. The Dwarves' songs, once filled with tales of kings and mountains, now told of fire and shadow. No outsider had seen the true heart of the core, but all knew that within it lay a being older than the world itself. And so the Firelord slept. His servants watched, the forges burned. The mountain lived and breathed, its molten heart beating in rhythm with his eternal flame. All that remained was for someone, or something, to disturb that slumber once more. For centuries, the molten heart of Blackrock Mountain remained hidden, sealed off from the world above, by walls of stone and rivers of fire. Few dared to venture deep enough to even sense the heat of the core, and those who did never returned to tell their tales. But as the age of adventurers dawned, whispers began to spread once more. Stories of strange movements beneath the mountain, of creatures shaped from flame, and of a power that seemed to pulse from the earth itself. What began as rumor soon drew the attention of heroes, scholars, and explorers alike, all determined to uncover the truth buried in the mountain's depths. The first steps into this mystery led to the immense dwarven city of Blackrock Depths, the capital of the Dark Iron Dwarves and the gateway to the unknown. Built within the hollowed caverns of the mountain, the city was a labyrinth of forges, prisons, and ancient halls, all ruled by Emperor Dagran Thorisan, the distant descendant of the same Thorisan who had summoned Ragnaros centuries before. His people still served the Firelord, though few understood the full scope of the power they worshipped. For the adventurers who entered those burning corridors, it quickly became clear that something vast and ancient stirred below. Through their journeys in Blackrock Depths, adventurers uncovered fragments of history long buried by ash and fear. They met the enslaved and the fanatical, dwarves who spoke in reverence of the Firelord, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. Ancient texts and runes hinted that the city was merely a shell, a fortress built atop something older and more powerful. The forges burned with a heat no natural flame could produce, and the molten rivers that ran through the halls seemed to flow from a single source deep below the mountain. As heroes delved deeper, they began to face the Firelord's servants, creatures that bore his mark. In the lower chambers of the depths, elementals roamed freely, their bodies formed of molten rock and pure flame. Corehounds, monstrous beasts of fire and teeth, guarded the ancient tunnels that led ever downward. Each step closer to the heart of the mountain revealed more signs of corruption. The air thickened with smoke, the walls glowed with heat, and the very stone began to pulse, as if alive. Among the clues discovered by adventurers were accounts of Ragnaros' lieutenants, beings of immense power who commanded armies of fire within the core. Lucifron, the Flamewaker High Guard, was said to be Ragnaros' enforcer, the hand that maintained order among the fiery legions. He represented not only the will of the Firelord, but also his purity. a being who sought to burn away all imperfection and weakness from Ragnaros' realm. His mere presence was said to corrupt the souls of those who neared him, twisting their wills into devotion for the Firelord's cause. Then there was Magmadar, the monstrous core hound, believed to be the first and greatest of his kind. Ancient dwarven runes referred to him as the Flame's Fang, a beast forged from the Firelord's own breath. Legends claimed that his roar could cause molten rock to surge from the ground, and that his eyes burned with eternal hatred for all mortal life. To face Magmadar was to face the raw fury of the mountain itself, a living embodiment of Ragnaros' dominion. Gar, another of the Firelord's generals, was a creature of strategy and control. Unlike the mindless beasts of the core, Gar was said to be cunning, an elemental who commanded the lesser fires with precision. He was tasked with guarding the core's perimeter, ensuring that no intruder would ever reach the inner sanctum of Ragnaros. Bound by chains of flame and surrounded by an army of volatile minions, Gar represented the disciplined side of the Firelord's army, a reminder that even chaos has its structure when guided by divine fury. The discovery of these beings, their lore and their legends painted a chilling picture. The adventurers realized that Ragnaros was not merely a myth or a dormant elemental. He was alive, commanding legions from the depths of the core. Every elemental encountered, every surge of heat felt in the tunnels, was proof of his lingering presence. The Firelord's reach extended beyond the molten caverns, touching the mountain's upper halls and corrupting even its rulers. Emperor Tharisan himself seemed to channel a fragment of that ancient power, his throne surrounded by constant flame. Rumors began to spread beyond the mountain. The Kirin Tor, ever watchful for signs of elemental instability, grew concerned that the barrier between Azeroth and the elemental plane was weakening. Explorers and adventurers reported that the mountain's tremors were becoming more violent, as if something beneath was stirring from slumber. The few who escaped Blackrock depths alive spoke of corridors glowing like furnaces, of voices echoing through the heat, whispering in languages older than the world. These warnings could not be ignored. Soon, the bravest heroes of the Horde and the Alliance began to prepare for an expedition unlike any before, a descent into the heart of Blackrock Mountain, where the source of all this power awaited. They gathered what knowledge they could, studying the weaknesses of the Firelord's servants and crafting weapons capable of withstanding unimaginable heat. The deeper they learned, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary battle. The Firelord's realm was alive, bound to the very essence of Azeroth itself. And so, as groups of champions began to assemble at the base of the mountain, the fires within it burned brighter than ever. The ground rumbled with anticipation, as if the core itself could sense what was coming. The time had arrived for mortals to challenge a god of fire, to venture where none had returned, into the blazing heart of Molten Core. The descent into Molten Core was unlike any journey adventurers had ever undertaken. It began with a single step, through the massive lava-filled caverns hidden deep within Blackrock Mountain, where the very air seemed to burn in their lungs. Heat shimmered off the molten rivers that flowed beneath narrow stone bridges, and the ground cracked and pulsed as if the mountain itself were alive. Each echo of a bootstep was swallowed by the roar of fire and the deep rumble of the earth. Those who dared to enter knew they were trespassing in a realm that did not belong to mortals, a place where the world's raw elemental fury had been given form. The first explorers of Molten Core were not soldiers or armies, but small bands of heroes, their courage outweighing their numbers. They came armed with enchanted weapons, frost-coated spells, and a fragile hope that they might survive what awaited them. Every moment was a test of endurance. The heat was suffocating. Their armor glowed with the touch of the air, and even the stone beneath their feet radiated pain. Yet they pressed on, driven by curiosity, glory, or the promise of ending the Firelord's reign before it could spread beyond the mountain. The moment they stepped beyond the entrance, they were met by Ragnaros' sentinels, the living embodiment of the core's rage. Flamewaker warriors stalked the tunnels, their bodies flickering like living torches, armed with blades forged in molten rivers. They were led by Lucifron, the Flamewaker High Guard, whose very presence filled the air with choking fumes. He was the first true test of the raid, a being of pure discipline and loyalty to the Firelord. Lucifron's power was not just his strength in battle, but the corruption that radiated from him, a burning curse that seeped into the minds of his enemies. To defeat him required unity, every movement, every spell cast in perfect coordination. And when he finally fell, the mountain itself seemed to scream, as though one of its own hearts had stopped beating. But Lucifron's death was only the beginning. His fall echoed through the core, awakening greater terrors from the depths. The heat grew heavier, the ground trembled, and from the shadows emerged Magmadar, the monstrous core hound, ancient and terrible. Twice the height of a warhorse, its skin was made of cracked stone and flame, its eyes blazing with unending fury. When it roared, the sound rolled like thunder through the caverns, shaking loose boulders from the ceiling. The battle against Magmadar was chaos incarnate. Adventurers scrambling to stay alive as waves of fire and smoke filled the air, their weapons glowing white-hot from the heat. It was not a battle fought with skill alone, but with endurance, willpower, and unbreakable trust between comrades. When the beast finally fell, its massive body collapsed into a pool of lava, leaving behind only silence and the stench of scorched stone. The deeper the adventurers went, the more unnatural the world became. Rivers of molten rock twisted and split into glowing paths, leading into vast caverns that pulsed with light. Here the boundaries between the mortal world and the elemental plane of fire blurred completely. The air shimmered with heat mirages, the stone underfoot was soft like living flesh, and whispers echoed from nowhere, voices of the Firelord's servants, ancient and mocking. Next came Gar, the cunning elemental general, surrounded by his army of explosive minions. Unlike Magmadar's raw fury, Gar fought with cold precision. His every move was measured, every burst of flame timed to shatter coordination and spread panic. His soldiers, living fragments of his own essence, detonated with each strike, forcing adventurers to fight not only him but the environment itself. One mistake could turn the cavern into a storm of fire. It was a battle of patience and discipline, of holding formation under unbearable heat. When Gar was finally destroyed, the adventurers stood in awe, for they had slain not merely an enemy, but a piece of the Firelord's soul. Further into the core lay even greater horrors. Baron Geddon, the living explosion who turned the very air into a weapon. Shazra, the arcane inferno whose mastery of fire magic rivaled that of the greatest mages. And Gehenna's, the fallen flamewaker, who cursed all who dared challenge the will of Ragnaros. Each encounter tested not only strength but strategy. No warrior could survive alone. It required the perfect balance of magic and might, healers steady as stone, and leaders who could remain calm even as the floor erupted beneath them. Every victory came at a cost. Armor melted, weapons cracked, and even the most skilled fighters found themselves on the brink of collapse. But with each fallen lieutenant, the core's glow dimmed slightly, as though Ragnaros's reach was weakening. The adventurers could feel it, the faint shift in the air, the flicker of resistance in the flame. They were drawing closer to something colossal, something ancient and aware of their presence. As they approached the final chambers, the heat became unbearable. The air shimmered so violently that vision blurred, and the sound of molten rivers roared like a storm. Massive obsidian gates stood before them, carved with runes that pulsed like veins of living fire. Beyond those gates lay the throne of Ragnaros, the very heart of the mountain, the birthplace of its fury. The adventurers paused, knowing that once they stepped through, there would be no turning back. The Firelord was awake. His lieutenants had fallen, his dominion was under siege, and his rage boiled like the molten rivers around them. The mountain trembled, cracks opened in the stone, and a voice echoed through the flames, deep, ancient, and filled with scorn. "You dare challenge me, mortals." The time had come. The journey through fire and death had led to this moment, the awakening of Ragnaros the Firelord himself. The Chamber of Ragnaros was a world unto itself, a vast searing void, where fire replaced air and molten rivers flowed like veins through the stone. The temperature was beyond mortal endurance. Even the strongest adventurers could feel their armor burning against their skin, their lungs struggling to draw breath from air that tasted like smoke and ash. The walls glowed as if alive, pulsing with orange light that seemed to follow the rhythm of an unseen heartbeat. It was the heart of the world, the true seat of the Firelord's power, where no mortal was ever meant to stand. Before the final confrontation, the champions of Azeroth gathered in silence. Their voices were hushed, drowned by the constant rumble of magma and the crackling roar of unseen flames. They knew what awaited them. Ragnaros was not a mere creature of flesh and bone, but a force of nature, an elemental god bound to the very essence of fire. His power was infinite within his domain, and the mountain itself would rise to defend him. Yet retreat was no longer an option. Too much had been sacrificed, too many lives lost to reach this point. The heroes steadied their weapons, cast wards of frost and protection, and prepared to face a being older than the world itself. Ancient runes lined the floor of the cavern, glowing brighter with every passing second. The ground began to quake, sending ripples through the pools of molten rock. Then, with a thunderous roar, the lava exploded upward, and from the inferno rose a colossal form, Ragnaros the Firelord. His upper body emerged from the lava, towering above the mortals who had dared to challenge him. His body was made of living flame, his eyes twin suns that burned with endless wrath. In his hand he held sulphurous, the legendary hammer forged in the core of the world, every swing of which could shatter mountains and melt the earth itself. The air trembled as his voice filled the cavern, a booming, resonant growl that echoed like thunder through the molten halls. "Too soon, you have awakened me too soon, Executus." Even the most battle-hardened adventurers faltered under the weight of that voice. The ground cracked, rivers of lava surged, and fire burst from the air itself. The Firelord's awakening was not just a battle, it was a cataclysm. He raged against the mortals who dared defy him, every movement of his form sending waves of heat across the chamber. His very presence was agony. Standing before him was to stand before the embodiment of destruction. But the heroes did not flee. They fought back with everything they had: frost magic to weaken his flames, holy light to protect against his fury, and enchanted steel that glowed with runes of resistance. The battle was chaos and beauty intertwined. Fire met ice, divine energy clashed with elemental wrath, and the entire mountain seemed to shake with the violence of the confrontation. Every strike against Ragnaros was an act of defiance, a challenge to the ancient order of the world itself. Throughout the fight, the Firelord summoned waves of his servants, sons of flame born from the magma, each one exploding into existence to defend their master. The adventurers were forced to divide their strength, holding the line against endless waves of fire, while striking at Ragnaros whenever he emerged from the molten lake. Again and again he roared his fury, slamming sulphurous into the ground and sending fiery shockwaves across the cavern. But for every hero that fell, another rose to take their place. Determination burned brighter than the flames around them. At last, after what felt like an eternity of fire and struggle, the balance began to shift. Ragnaros's movement slowed, his roars grew weaker, and cracks appeared along his molten form. His flames dimmed, flickering like a dying sun. With one final, earth-shaking strike, the adventurers unleashed their combined power, magic, steel, and courage united, and the Firelord collapsed back into the lava from which he had come. The chamber fell silent except for the slow hiss of cooling stone. The impossible had been done. Ragnaros the Firelord was defeated. But even in defeat, his presence did not vanish completely. The molten lake still glowed with his essence, and his voice lingered like an echo of doom. Ragnaros was an elemental being. He could not truly die in the mortal realm. His essence would return to the Firelands, his home in the elemental plane, where he would recover and plot his vengeance. What the heroes had achieved was not destruction, but banishment, a temporary victory in a war as old as Azeroth itself. Still, the meaning of that victory was monumental. The fall of Ragnaros proved that mortals could challenge the powers that once ruled the world. It was a declaration of strength, a moment when the heroes of Azeroth stood as equals against gods. The balance of the elements shifted, if only slightly, and the fires beneath Blackrock Mountain began to calm. For the first time in centuries, the air above the mountain grew still, and the world could breathe again. Yet his influence endured. The Dark Iron Dwarves continued to serve his memory, their faith unbroken even in his absence. The forges of Blackrock still burned, and the scars of his dominion remained across the land. Ragnaros had fallen, but his flame was eternal, flickering in the hearts of those who had once worshipped him and in the whispers of the mountain itself. As the adventurers emerged from the core, their armor scorched and their spirits heavy, they carried with them more than victory. They carried a story, the tale of how mortals entered the domain of fire and faced the wrath of an elemental lord. The mountain behind them still smoldered, a silent monument to what had been done. And somewhere in the deepest reaches of the elemental plane, Ragnaros stirred once more, his voice echoing through endless flame, "By fire be purged." In the years that followed the fall of Ragnaros, the legend of Molten Core burned brighter than ever. What began as a desperate expedition into the fiery heart of Blackrock Mountain became something much greater, the foundation of an entire culture within Azeroth and beyond. Molten Core wasn't just a raid, it was a rite of passage. It marked the moment when the scattered adventurers of a young world learned to fight as one, to stand together against impossible odds, and to create something that would define the very spirit of World of Warcraft. When the first heroes entered the core, they were pioneers stepping into the unknown. There were no guides, no strategies written by veterans, only courage, trial, and error. Groups of 40 players assembled, often from all corners of Azeroth, bound not by power but by trust. Each role mattered. The tanks who braved the Firelord's fury, the healers who fought exhaustion to keep their allies alive, the mages and warlocks who turned their mastery of magic into weapons against the endless tide of flame. Communication became survival. One missed command, one moment of hesitation, could turn victory into chaos. Molten Core taught players discipline, cooperation, and patience, lessons that would shape every raid that came after. For many, it was their first glimpse into the scale of what Azeroth truly was. Inside those burning halls, the sense of adventure expanded beyond the limits of a single quest or dungeon. Molten Core was a world within a world, a test of endurance where hundreds of attempts could precede a single victory. Guilds rose and fell in those molten chambers. Friendships were forged in the heat of endless battles, and rivalries were born in the competition to claim the Firelord's treasures. The words Raid Night became sacred, as dozens gathered week after week to face the flames once more, driven by ambition, camaraderie, or simple wonder at what lay beneath the mountain. And the rewards were just as legendary as the battles. The weapons forged in Ragnaros's realm became icons, the fiery blade Sulphurus, the staff of dominance, the crown of destruction. Each piece of gear told a story of perseverance, a tangible reminder of triumph over the impossible. To wear something from Molten Core was to carry proof that you had walked through fire and survived. Those items weren't just tools of war, they were relics of a time when every victory had to be earned through sweat, failure, and sheer will. Even beyond the loot and glory, Molten Core became a cultural landmark. It was the spark that ignited the age of raiding, setting the standard for every great challenge that followed, from Onyxia's lair to Naxxrama's, from Illidan's Black Temple to Arthas's ice-crowned citadel. Every encounter, every raid that players would face in the years to come, owed something to that first brutal adventure beneath Blackrock Mountain. It showed Blizzard and its players what was possible, that the world could challenge them not just with stories, but with experiences that demanded unity and courage. But for all its chaos and difficulty, there was also a sense of wonder that could never be recreated. The sight of molten rivers casting long shadows on obsidian walls, the echo of footsteps across the fiery bridges, the tremor of the mountain as Ragnaros's voice thundered through the caverns, it all created an atmosphere that transcended mere gameplay. For many, Molten Core was where the fantasy of Azeroth became real. It was where legends were born, and where thousands of players found a shared identity as heroes who dared to challenge the Firelord himself. Even as the world moved forward, and new expansions brought greater threats and grander battles, the memory of Molten Core endured. Veterans still spoke of their first time hearing Ragnaros's roar, of the endless nights spent perfecting strategies, of the friendships that outlasted the game itself. When Blizzard reintroduced Molten Core during special events, it wasn't just nostalgia. It was reverence. Players returned to pay respect to the place where it all began, to face once again the heat, the chaos, and the beauty of the core. For the Dark Iron Dwarves, the story continued as well. Though the Firelord's grasp weakened after his defeat, his influence lingered within their hearts and forges. Some still whispered his name in secret, believing that the Firelord would one day rise again from the ashes, and in time he did. Not within the core, but within the elemental plane itself, during the age of Deathwing and the Cataclysm. His resurgence proved that true elemental power never truly fades. Fire may die down, but its embers remain, waiting for the right breath of air to spark once more. Molten Core was more than a place, it was a symbol. It embodied the struggle of mortals against the impossible, the triumph of unity over chaos, and the eternal allure of the unknown. It represented the heart of World of Warcraft's earliest years, a time when every victory felt monumental and every defeat carried lessons that shaped players forever. And though the fires of the core may have dimmed, the flame it kindled still burns, in the memories of those who stood within its heat, in the guilds that were born from its trials, and in the stories passed down through generations of adventurers. Beneath Blackrock Mountain, the molten rivers still flow, whispering with the echo of an ancient voice. By fire be purged. And somewhere in those eternal depths, the Firelord's ember still glows, not as a threat but as a memory, a reminder that even gods can fall, that courage can overcome flame, and that every legend, no matter how fiery its birth, leaves behind a light that never truly fades.